Which position does your favorite team need to fix in this year's 2024 NFL Draft? Welcome, football fans, draft fanatics. It's Mitch here of TheBottomLineView, here to go through all 32 NFL teams, discuss the state of their roster entering the 2024 NFL Draft. A nice exercise for me and for you to understand the strengths, the weaknesses, and where each team needs to improve in this year's draft. If they do not address these positions, they're going to be in for a very long 2024. Obviously, some teams are in different situations than others. Some are rebuilding, some are trying to win a championship. Some teams have more needs than others, and I'll discuss each team in detail in this video. If that sounds good, guys, Gronk spike the like button, and if you enjoy detailed, honest NFL analysis, then subscribe. We're trying to hit 50K here soon, and I would really appreciate your support. So do subscribe, because I don't think many people on YouTube or the internet in general know each team the way I do. So let's back it up and let's discuss each team, beginning with the Arizona Cardinals. And guys, I do want you to let me know in the comments if I'm accurate or inaccurate when it comes to your team's needs and where you think they need to improve the most. So beginning with the Arizona Cardinals, the Cardinals' biggest needs in the draft are wide receiver, edge, and corner. And they have other needs, but I stuck with 3 for each team as their greatest needs, and then we'll expand upon that. So beginning with that 4th overall pick, they will likely have the opportunity to select the best receiver in the draft, with Marquise Brown moving on to the Kansas City Chiefs, and really them never having any interest in bringing him back. It does appear that the Cardinals have had in mind this entire time to select a number 1 receiver in this year's draft. Now, I believe it will likely be Marvin Harrison Jr. with this pick, but the Cardinals are in a position where I think they need many positions. So if they do decide to trade back, they could still maybe get into a position where they could get Rome Odunze or maybe even Malik Neighbors still high in the first round. And they do have a later first round pick on top of that. So I believe where they're pretty good is offensive line, quarterback. I think they're fine at running back. I think their tight end situation is nice with a young stud in Trey McBride. But honestly, the entire defense could use some work outside of possibly off-ball linebacker and safety. Other than that, they could use work with the pass rush. They could use work with the corner position. They could use work in the interior defensive line. But the way that I look at it is they've signed a bunch of players on the interior defensive line already. 3 different free agents, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols being the 2 biggest of the group in terms of the most money and the most financial aid to those players to come in and help their team. So I personally believe if I'm the Cardinals, I'm trying to take that wide receiver at number 4. I'm not really trying to trade back because I'm just going to take the potential of getting an all-pro at number 4 and Marvin Harrison Jr. And then I'm probably just going to draft somebody in the later first round that can address one of my defensive needs. So whether that be corner, where there could be somebody there, whether that be pass rusher, or just the best defensive player available, that's probably where I would go. Later in the draft, I think you can get to potentially addressing, maybe a younger running back later in the draft. Maybe they could continue to try to hit on some interior defensive linemen. But I think the primary needs here, wide receiver, edge, and corner, are going to be fulfilled within the first 2 days of the draft for the Cardinals. And I think they should stay put at number 4 and pick Marvin Harrison Jr. And then in the second round, they should go probably sway to still defense. Like, honestly, they should go receiver and then defense all over their draft. So those are the biggest needs. That's what they need to solve. There are quite a few needs for the Cardinals, but I kind of look at the Cardinals as a team that if they can hit a home run with this draft, they could be much better this year than people give them credit for. So that's the Arizona Cardinals. Next up, the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons have been a bit frustrating for me in their approach from free agency. Now, I do love that they picked up Kirk Cousins, but man, outside of Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, They did trade Desmond Ridder for Rondale Moore, so that is what it is. But they have not addressed their biggest need, in my opinion, which is pass rush. Outside of the quarterback position, I thought that was their biggest need. It's still their biggest need. I still think they haven't done enough with their secondary as well. So I think their draft is going to be pretty clear and obvious. I think if they can get the top pass rusher in the draft with their first pick, that's probably where they're going to go, or at least a pass rusher with that pick, because I don't think there's a premier corner that they would be looking to pick that highly, but I could be wrong. I do believe that those are the positions I'd be trying to secure. Raheem Morris, I think, does need help with his pass rush in terms of edge rushers or interior defensive line. They have some good interior defensive linemen already in Atlanta, so although they're older, I don't think that that's necessarily a major need. That's probably down the line, maybe looking to replenish with some younger talent and some fresh bodies. But I think they're actually kind of underrated at linebacker with Caden Ellis and Nate Landman. I think those guys are fine. I think they've got some nice rotation pieces at the edge position, like a Lorenzo Carter or, that type of guy. I just don't think they have the number one edge rusher that's going to strike fear into an offense. They do have a really good corner and a really good safety in A.J. Terrell and Jesse Bates, but more so in the secondary, they're missing their number two corner, their number two safety, at least in my opinion. So that's where I'd be going. Early in the draft, try to get a pass rusher with desperation, and then probably on day two, you're looking to add to the secondary. Other than that, I think the Falcons are fine. I definitely think that receiver could always be upgraded, but I honestly feel like with Drake London as your number one, Darnell Mooney as your number two, Rondale Moore as a chess piece, Ray McLeod as your returner / fourth receiver, Cardale Hodge is still there. So they've got enough pieces to make that work. They have running back depth. They've got their quarterback now. You have your tight end, and you have your backup tight end. So there's not a lot on offense. I do think maybe left tackle of the future is a possibility as Jake Matthews is getting a little bit older. So maybe they take a swing later in the draft at tackle. But I think it's pretty obvious based on what they did in free agency where they're going to go in the draft. And that's defense. And that's Raheem Morris. And that's his specialty. So that's where they should be going. Edge rusher, corner, secondary, and then anything else to help out Kirk Cousins win this year. So the Falcons, pretty clear and obvious plan. Next up, we got the Baltimore Ravens, which I think is a little bit less obvious just because the Ravens were looked at as the top team in the AFC during the regular season. Many people thought they would get to the Super Bowl. That did not take place. So what do they need to do here? They lost a lot of pieces in free agency on the offensive line. So I think their biggest needs and their biggest check marks are going to come if they can fulfill that offensive line. Tackle, guard, other than center, I think they could use any of those positions on the offensive line. Tyler Linderbaum is a beast in the middle. He's young, so not worried about him. But other than that, even at left tackle, Ronnie Stanley is older, so I'd be maybe looking to add some depth to that position or somebody that can be a reliable fill-in if he gets hurt, which has been something that's happened pretty frequently. But I think guard is going to be an area where they look to upgrade in the draft on probably day two. And I wouldn't be shocked on day one if they went to a premier defensive player, just whoever they feel is the best guy, whether that be a corner or an edge rusher. I listed edge as their top need. They have Kyle Van Noy, they have Owe, they have a Jabo, who I think they might like, but we haven't really seen him in the NFL. So I think edge is their biggest need. Especially with Mike McDonald gone, I feel like the reliance on the scheme to create pressure, you have to be a little bit more talented at that position with a brilliant mind on defense having left. So personally, I think edge should be their focus. But if they can't find an edge, I'd be fine. I think their corner position is honestly fine. I like Brandon Stevens. Obviously, they have Marlon Humphrey. Jalen Armour-Davis is interesting. Arthur Millette is still there. So they have enough pieces. Safety is kind of interesting because they only have two on their roster, but both of them are premier players, so you're not going to be drafting one in the first round. Maybe they could get a stud in the interior, but I think that they're looking for Broderick Washington and Travis Jones, to take bigger steps. Michael Pierce is still there. Brent Urban is still there. So they do have more depth than you would realize with all the kind of missing pieces that took place this offseason. Receiver, honestly, could be another place that they go because Zay Flowers is a stud, but Rashad Bateman is highly kind of up and down, and I'm not considering him a go-to guy in an offense. Although they do have Mark Andrews at tight end, so that's kind of their top two guys, Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, and then you still got Isaiah Likely, who I like. Nelson Aguilar came back. So, honestly, I think if it's not offensive line early, it's probably going to be defensive line, edge rusher, pass rusher, something of that sort. And that should be their focus, offensive and defensive lines, and beefing up the Baltimore Ravens. So, that's what I look at it. If they can improve those areas, maybe I'll be considering them back into the real AFC contendership. But right now, I don't quite see them there unless they fix the offensive line and maybe get a little bit better in the pass rushing front. Next up, the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills have a couple pretty clear needs. So first of all, wide receiver. Curtis Samuel is brought in as a free agent, as well as Mac Hollins. I think Mac Hollins could be a little bit deceptive in that pickup. I think he can do a lot of the things Gabe Davis can do in terms of an outside X receiver that can run vertical and that can block. I think that's what he can do. And he actually was pretty productive with the Raiders in that type of role. Curtis Samuel, I really like that addition for his speed and explosiveness to this offense. But they need a number one receiver. So whoever they can get in the back of the first round, maybe they'll look to trade up. But regardless, I think receiver is the pick in the first round. And it's pretty clear and obvious. I think they have a little bit of an underrated need in terms of their interior offensive line. And possibly right tackle. I like the addition of Collins at the right tackle position. At least he provides some upside. Spencer Brown did improve last year, so I don't think they're desperate there. Obviously, they have Deion Dawkins at the left side. But the offensive line, they want Connor McGovern to play center and David Edwards maybe to play guard this year. I don't think he played much last year. Torrance will go into his second year, and they brought in Will Clapp, the greatest name in football. So the offensive line, I don't think it's great. I don't think it's really a desperate need given all the pros and the kind of vets that they have in that position. So after receiver, I think that defense is going to be the way they go, whether it be an edge rusher with maybe more upside than somebody like AJ Epinesa, who feels like a good professional football player, a good role player, but not necessarily somebody you want starting on your defensive line. So maybe in the second round, they go with an edge rusher with upside. Maybe they could go to the safety position. There will be a good safety in the second round available. They definitely could utilize some fresh blood at that position. Corner, I think they're fine. I think they're good at linebacker. I think interior defensive line is in pretty good shape with Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Deshaun Williams, Austin Johnson, etc. I think they're fine there. I think it's really edge or safety in that second round range. And then offensive line is deceptive. I feel like offensive line, they could even take multiple shots at wide receiver, maybe one early and one later. But honestly, the Bills don't have as many holes as people would think. I think Josh Allen obviously fills up a lot of those holes and makes them a lot better. But the defense, I don't think is as bad on paper as people would make it out to be. I think they could use a young athletic safety, a young athletic edge rusher. But other than that, I don't think they're in bad position to be a pretty good team this year. Next up, the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers, it's kind of obvious to me what they're going to be doing in the draft. That's addressing the defense. And I think that's where Dan Morgan, the former linebacker, is most kind of suited to have success in the draft because he's a former linebacker. He understands defensive football. And the head coach is an offensive guy. So obviously they went out and they addressed receiver with Deontay Johnson. They brought in Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis for big money contracts at the guard positions. And they also brought in another guard on top of that, a former starter for the Packers. So they're fine on the offensive line. I actually think they have the upside of being really good on the offensive line. Tight end position could use maybe an upgrade. But outside of that, I don't think they mind Tommy Tremble. I think, and Ian Thomas is still there. Like, I don't love those guys by any means. They're definitely two of the weaker tight ends in football. So they might look at tight end on day 2. But I think running back, Miles Sanders, they spent money on him, so they have to play him. Chuba Hubbard, I like the Canadian kid. He's pretty explosive. I like his speed. But wide receiver, a lot of people would think that would be a need. But with Deontay Johnson coming in, Jonathan Mingo being a second-year player, hopefully he gets more kind of usage and production. They still got Terrace Marshall, who's kind of been a bust, but, maybe in a new scheme, you never know. David Moore they brought in as well. Adam Thielen is their slot player. So I think they're hoping for their starting 3 to be Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, and Jonathan Mingo. And then maybe they improve receiver next year again. But I think defense is the way they're going to have to go, because a lot of their better players on defense are kind of like short-term assets, right? Derek Brown is really, really good. He's a stud. And J.C. Horn is really, really good, but he's often injured. Other than that, I think their best players are guys that they've just signed, like Jadeveon Clowney, Josie Jewell, Jordan Fuller. These are all guys that are like short-term assets. So I think defensively, they're just going to have to throw everything, all their assets at the defense, honestly. Like, I think Panthers fans might still be looking at wide receiver, but Deontay Johnson, that trade, I think, fulfills that need. So I think they're going to go with edge, because when Clowney is gone, maybe next year or the year after, they're going to need an edge, right? Linebacker, Shaq Thompson, he's not there for much longer. Defensive line outside of Derek Brown is kind of weak. A'Shawn Robinson, I like. Shy Tuttle, I don't mind. But I think they could use, depth at that position. I think they could use a long-term solution at cornerback number 2, because Dane Jackson right now is their corner 2. Safeties are a little bit, Xavier Woods is getting a little bit older. So I feel like edge, and then, just defense. Like, I really don't have one kind of certainty. It's just like, who's the best player on the board on defense? We should probably take him. Like, that's kind of how I feel. And Bryce Young is going to get more help likely next year. He's already gotten a ton of help in free agency. Next up, we've got the Chicago Bears. And obviously, I do not have quarterback on the list here, because they're going to be taking quarterback first. After that, I think defensive line, edge or interior is going to be where they go. I think that's where they should go. Now, the problem with that is at number 9 overall, there might not be a good one to take at that spot. So maybe they take a receiver there, because Keenan Allen is pretty much a 1-year type of deal. So do they take another receiver and kind of have him as the number 3 in year 1 and then the number 2 in the future to go alongside DJ Moore? Maybe even the number 1 for the future and DJ Moore the 2 to partner with Caleb Williams. They could definitely do that. Running back, they're good. They signed DeAndre Swift. They have Khalil Herbert still. Roshan Johnson still there. They're stacked at running back. Offensive line, I actually think they're good at offensive line. I like their guards a lot. I think their tackles are young and promising. And they provided a lot of depth to the center position, Ryan Bates and Coleman Shelton, which makes me believe that they're going to probably stay away from center. Like, I feel like center, they tried to throw 2 different veterans at it to fulfill that need for this year, and then we'll revisit it after next year. So I kind of think that defensive line, interior, edge is going to be where they go. They definitely need another pass rusher in one way, shape, or form. I think safety is a sneaky need, because Kevin Byard is obviously a short-term solution, and Jonathan Owens is more of a depth player. Corner, maybe is a need, but I think they like Gordon and Stevenson, but they haven't really proven that they're studs. So I wouldn't rule out corner, but just knowing their coaching staff and the scheme they run, I think D-line will be what they're about. And then possibly receiver if they just can't pass up like Roma Dunze at number 9 or something. But I think the Bears are pretty obvious. They've done a lot of work in free agency. Quarterback's going to be at number 1. Defensive line's going to be where they go. And then they're young in the secondary. And I think the offensive line is fulfilled. I really think it's pretty obvious. Bears fans, let me know. Next up, the Cincinnati Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals, honestly, looking at their depth chart, I might have to make a video about the Bengals soon. I think if they keep T. Higgins, this might be the best Bengals team that Joe Burrow has ever had. Maybe that's a bold statement. I don't know. But on paper, I think they're really solid. And I struggled to honestly give them 3 needs. I think offensive line is still a need for them because Trent Brown is a short-term solution at right tackle. I think that guard could certainly use an upgrade specifically at left guard over Volson. Wide receiver, I honestly couldn't place it as a need because if T. Higgins is there, I don't think it's a need because I think Trenton Irwin and I think Charlie Jones or one of these younger guys will be able to step up. I personally liked Charlie Jones a lot. I think that one of these guys will step up into that number 3 role in rotation. So I think they're fine at wide receiver. I don't think they'll be missing Tyler Boyd, especially after adding Mike Gesicki, who's kind of like a big slot anyways. So I think they're fine at tight end because they don't really overly use that position. I think running back is actually fine because I think Chase Brown is a good player, and I think he'll be a good starting running back, and Zach Moss is a good backup. So I think their offense is good. Like, maybe this is just my perspective and how I value certain players, but I think this is how the Bengals view them as well. I think the offensive line guard could certainly be somewhere they go. Defensively, I think defensive tackle is a need, definitely in terms of depth, but also they lost DJ Reader. They try to replace him with Sheldon Rankins. That's definitely not 1-for-1. Rankins is definitely a bit worse. He's maybe a little bit more well-rounded, but not as good as a run defender. So maybe you look to bring in, a big, beefy guy at some point in the draft to help them in the run game. That's definitely an area they could improve from last season. I think corner is good, but not great. So I think they could maybe look at corner. They're good at safety with Hill, Battle, Bell, and Stone. They've got 4 safeties to work with there. And honestly, they have depth at corner. It's more so looking to upgrade one of those starting positions. Cam Taylor-Britt's their number 1. DJ Turner looked promising as a rookie, but we're not quite sure if he's going to be the guy. And then Mike Hilton is their nickel, who's getting a little bit older. So I'd look at corner to be one of the possible spots. They spent a pick on the first round on an edge player in Miles Murphy last year, so I don't think that's where they're going to go. So defensive tackle, cornerback, offensive line, those are the areas. Maybe receiver, but I highly doubt it unless they trade T. Higgins, which it doesn't appear is going to happen. So the Bengals are in really good shape to improve this roster in the draft. Next up, the Cleveland Browns. The Browns were one of the toughest teams in football to give out kind of needs for because they have pretty much gone out of their way to address all possible needs without having draft picks because they haven't really had draft picks because Deshaun Watson. So honestly, one of their biggest things they should do here, and this is maybe a hot take, they should pick a quarterback. Whenever they can, they should pick a quarterback. I know that they brought in Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley, and they have Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think they should continue to try to upgrade the quarterback position because if you can find a quarterback, if Deshaun Watson is not working out and he is just a bum, like he continues to not play well, I think they should continue to take swings on quarterback because you never know if you're going to land a Brock Purdy or maybe a Jalen Hurts a little bit earlier where you're able to pivot off of an expensive quarterback and go with a cheaper one. And that could really turn this team into a true contending team. Because right now, the quarterback is just not playing well enough. And if Deshaun does not work out, you want a possible solution. And that guy is not Jameis Winston, and it's not Tyler Huntley. Sorry to inform you that. I don't think it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson either. Now, that being said, they're good at running back. They brought in Nyheim Hines, Deontay Foreman. They have Jerome Ford, obviously Nick Chubb, and Pierre Strong. So they're very deep at that position. Wide receiver, honestly, could use like a real number 2, in my opinion. But they did go out and trade for Jerry Jeudy. So I think that with Cooper, Moore, they spent money on Jeudy. They view him as the number 2. They view Elijah Moore as a number 3, which I think some people would argue Jeudy is more of a number 3. But hey, Cedric Tillman's also there, who I don't mind. David Bell is also there. So they have depth. I don't think receiver is going to be one of the areas they try to improve. D-line, I would say the interior is old. So if they try to get younger, right, Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris, Quentin Jefferson, they're all older players. Maurice Hurst isn't, but they're all otherwise older players. So they could look to improve the defensive line youth. The edge position is, I think, could definitely use a younger guy. Like Zadarius Smith's on a 1-year contract pretty much permanently. So they could use another edge player. The linebacker position could use just an upgrade in general. Jordan Hicks brought in might give them some nice veteran leadership in this year. But then after this year, you don't really see a solution outside of JOK. And then the secondary, I think their corners are good, but they could certainly use depth at the corner position. So that might be something later in the draft. Safety, I like Thornhill. Delpit is okay. Rodney McLeod is kind of their depth guy, and Hickman I think they like as well. So I don't think safety is going to be a huge need, although they could definitely use like a stud at safety. They don't really have that, but are you going to go out of your way to pick that? So honestly, I think defensive line is probably where they're going to go. Linebacker is probably where they're going to go, and maybe secondary. But I think most of the picks are honestly going to be spent on the defense. And then I think they should go after a quarterback. That's the hot take of mine here with the Cleveland Browns. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys. Offensive line, linebacker, defensive line. The Dallas Cowboys actually have pretty clear and identifiable needs. Offensive line is where they should go early. I don't think receiver, everyone always brings up receiver. Everyone's bringing up the skill positions for the Cowboys. Running back, right? I could see them going with a running back in like the 3rd or the 4th round. That'd be totally fine, and that guy might even be able to start for this team. But when it comes to the primary needs in the 1st and 2nd round, I think that should be spent on offensive line. Whether it be guard, center, or tackle, it really doesn't matter. Because I think Tyler Smith is a stud. Zach Martin is a stud. Otherwise, I'm not so sure they have anyone else that I would say that guy's a starter in the NFL. Now, the Cowboys are kind of tricky because usually they have offensive linemen that they like that haven't really been playing, and then they start playing, and you're like, that guy's pretty good. Obviously, Terrence Steele is their right tackle who played last year, so I don't think they're in desperation for right tackle. So maybe they sway towards interior offensive line, but Tyler Smith has that versatility to be a premier guard or tackle, and Steele isn't the greatest right tackle. He was actually one of the worst in football last year. So I would say that tackle, guard, center, that should be their first 2 picks. Either way, that should be where they put their picks. After that, running back is definitely a need. I don't think they have a running back. I think Dowdle is fine. Deuce Vaughn could be their 3rd down back. They brought in Royce Freeman yesterday, so we'll see. But I think that running back could be like a 4th round, 3rd round pick. I think they could also go with linebacker or defensive tackle with those selections as well. And then depth at safety is certainly a concern. Their corners are fine. Their edge rushers are fine. They could use a little bit of depth at the edge position, but that could come in free agency later in July, August. So I think they're good on defense. I think they could definitely use a little bit of size at linebacker, a little bit of youth at linebacker, and then also a little bit of beef in the interior defensive line. But offense, especially offensive line, running back, is probably where their first 3 picks are going to be. Next up, we got the Denver Broncos. The Broncos obviously need a quarterback. I don't need, you don't need to come to this video for me to tell you that. But quarterback is their biggest need by far. I don't think they want Jared Stidham or Ben DiNucci starting for them this year. Definitely not Ben DiNucci. Maybe in the Italian league, but not in this one. A wide receiver, I feel like, is a need, but if Tim Patrick is healthy, they did sign Josh Reynolds. I think they'll be fine for this year. I think Sean Payton likes what he has in Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims, who he picked last year. So I don't think they're going to go to receiver because it's not pressing. Like, definitely, if Marvin Mims does not work out to be a stud, they definitely need a receiver. But that's not something that they're going to solve right away. Offensive line, center pops out at me as a major need. And I think they'll address that on probably day 2 at some point. But I think they're going to try to get a quarterback on day 1. I think they might try to trade up and get a quarterback. I think they might try to maybe trade back and pick a quarterback. But I think quarterback is definitely a need. And then otherwise, I think defensively, edge rusher, like a premier edge rusher, or just a premier defensive player. whether it be another corner, which I don't think is really going to be day one. That might be third round, fourth round type thing. Defensive line, like a premier defensive lineman. Could they go after one of those guys? They have Zach Allen. They have DJ Jones, although I don't know. He's kind of on thin ice. I don't love their defensive line situation outside of Zach Allen. I think their edge rusher situation, they need more out of Nick Bonito, but they don't have a premier edge rusher. I think their linebackers are fine with Cody Barton, Alex Singleton, Drew Sanders. I think they're fine there. They've got a lot of like rotation edge players. Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, Drew Sanders is kind of an edge player. Nick Bonito. So they've got edge depth. They don't have a stud. So I'd say if they don't go with quarterback in the first round or, interior offensive line early, they're going to go with edge rusher. Safety, I think, is sort of a need, but not really. Corner is a little bit of a need, but like you've got Pat Surtain, so you don't really need a number one. So maybe a little bit later in the draft. But I kind of feel like the Broncos are going to go offensive line, quarterback, edge rusher, defensive line. Those are the areas where they're going to spend all their picks on the first couple days. Next up, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are in a different mode than a team like the Denver Broncos, where Denver is trying to rebuild and trying to add real players to their team. I think Detroit is probably looking to add more niche players or players that can contribute to a team that wants to win a championship, and then also players for the future that can replenish this roster. So when I think about that, the replenishing, you have to think about guard, because Graham Glasgow is a little bit older. Kevin Zeitler, who they just got this year and signed this year to replace Jonah Jackson, who left. Those guys are old. So they're going to have to bring in a guard for the future. So I think guard is going to be one of their premier picks. If they want to try to strike a home run, wide receiver, I wouldn't be shocked. Wide receiver could be one of their picks, because Jameson Williams has shown flashes, but not consistency. And outside of Amon-Ra, and then obviously Sam Laporta at tight end, they could definitely use a perimeter go-to receiver. So don't be shocked by that one. But yeah, pass rusher to a certain degree. They're hoping Marcus Davenport can help out and DJ Reader can do his thing in the inside. And they do have plenty of depth. Like, obviously Hutchinson is their guy, but then they've got Josh Paschal, who they like to play a role on the edge as a more of a run stuffer. James Houston is more of their kind of edge rusher, like go to the quarterback type guy. John Kaminsky is still there. Like, they're not desperate for an edge player, in my opinion, if Marcus Davenport works out to a certain degree. But corner to me is more of the desperation. Like, I like Amik Robertson. That pickup was nice. And obviously Carlton Davis will be their number one guy. Emmanuel Mosley, they tried to re-sign. Maybe he'll work out. Maybe he won't. Obviously Brian Branch is their inside nickel guy. So I guess they could use depth at safety with Kirby Joseph and Melon Fonwu being the starters. But then after that, maybe being a little bit fishy behind them. But honestly, I think, like, rather like another perimeter corner, a third safety at some point in the draft. Maybe they could sign that in free agency. Guard, receiver. It's kind of the areas I'm thinking. Early on, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I think probably offensive line, or if a receiver falls, or maybe a corner. But that's kind of like the areas I'm thinking for Detroit. A couple needs, but not too many. I think a lot of these picks will be backups this year. I don't think many will be counted on like they were last year for Detroit. The Green Bay Packers are fascinating. I made a video about them. Thank you for watching it. The offensive line definitely is a little bit of a bigger need than I would have thought, and I think many of the fan base believe that as well. I think that the guard position is clear and obvious. I think one of the starters is definitely going to be maybe picked, or at least there's going to be somebody picked on day one, day two, in the first or second round or third round. We're going to see a guard selected. So guard is going to be a pick in the first 60 to 90 picks for the Packers. They're not going to pick a receiver. They don't typically early anyways, but they've got 4 that I really like. And then running back, they're good. Quarterback, obviously, they're fine. Tight end, they're good. And then defensively, I think that that's where their premier picks are probably going to be spent. I think safety is definitely a need. Outside of Xavier McKinney, I don't think they really have a reliable starter. So that's kind of the clear one. And where they pick in the first round, I think there's going to be a really good safety there. Or on the second round, they could pick a safety. But defensive line is also an area I wouldn't mind them to address that. Like, I feel like defensive line, depending on what they do, right? Because they've largely been like a 5-man front team with like 3 interior defensive linemen, 2 edge rushers, kind of a 3-4-esque type of team. But now with the new defensive coordinator, if they're going to play more 4-man front, that kind of changes how I think of them, because Rashawn Gary will be an edge player, Preston Smith is an edge player, and then you got Lucas Van Ness coming off the bench, and you got Kenny Clark and Wyatt inside. So it kind of changes the math for me with how I look at them. Because if I looked at them as a 5-man front team, then I would kind of say that, they might need another defensive lineman to play a lot of snaps. TJ Slayton, I think, is fine in a rotational role. I kind of feel like if they're going to be a 4-man front team, I would almost switch their biggest needs being from defensive line, interior that is, to linebacker. Because I feel like Quay Walker is really good at times. He's a little inconsistent. But they could use somebody beside Quay Walker. So linebacker, safety, middle of the field defense, especially with this new scheme, certainly could be a need, as well as maybe nickel corner, but I don't mind Nixon in that spot. I guess you're hoping Eric Stokes just stays healthy at the other corner position. Some people think corner is a need for them, but it kind of depends on Eric Stokes. Maybe a little bit later in the draft for some depth. But I would say interior offensive line / guard. I would say safety. I would say linebacker, maybe defensive line, maybe cornerback. But that's where I would go with the Packers. I think a lot of defensive picks in this draft. Next up, the Houston Texans. Texans don't have many needs, and honestly, at this point, they don't have that many draft picks remaining. So it was a little difficult. I think offensively, they don't really need anything outside of offensive line depth. That's it, honestly. Like, this team, the more that I look at them, the more I think they're just really awesome. Like, maybe I'm just out of my mind, but this receiving core is one of the best in the NFL. They've got a premier left tackle. I think they could use, looking at it now, youth at guard, because Shaq Mason's getting a little bit older. Kenyon Green hasn't exactly worked out yet. So, yeah, guard, I would say, would be somewhere I would look to. Tackle, they're still fairly young with Titus Howard and Laramie Tunsil. They could use depth at tackle, but it's not a starting position. Defensively, I think corner is a huge need for them. I think corner 2 is a big need. I know they brought in Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson, but those are more projects than anything. I think CB2 is big. Maybe a safety, maybe defensive line. But the thing that kind of makes me hesitate with defensive line is they brought in so many pieces in free agency. I mean, Tim Settle, Mario Edwards, Fatou Kazi, Danico Autry can play a little D-tackle. They obviously don't need edge because they signed Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson, and then they got Derek Barnett. So they don't need an edge. And they signed a linebacker in Aziz. So they don't really need linebacker other than depth linebacker. But Neville Hewitt is a fine depth linebacker. Maybe they add a depth linebacker. I don't know. Like, this is a team that's really hard because they have a lot of good players. So I would say corner 2 pops to me, and I would say offensive line. But they could really pick whoever they want, honestly. Like, other than receiver or quarterback, I'd probably say those would be stupid picks. But other than that, I think they could probably just pick the best player available. I think they're that good. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are not in the same position as the Houston Texans. I think they have certain needs. Wide receiver 2, to me, is a big need. I don't think Alec Pierce is all that good. He pretty much just runs routes for fun out there. Josh Downs, I think, is a pretty good slot receiver, but nothing special. So I think they could use a number 2 receiver for Anthony Richardson. I think they could use a right guard without question. I think they could use an upgrade at tight end, although I don't think it's a premier need. I would say that the defensive line, they feel like they have all the pieces there. I don't think their edge rotation is amazing, but I don't also think it's a big need. I definitely would say that safety and corner are needs. It's nice that they re-signed Julian Blackmon. I think Nick Cross is kind of fascinating and promising, but corner is big. So I would say the biggest needs, wide receiver, try to get one if you can. Interior offensive line, cornerback. Those are the areas that stand out to me. Maybe linebacker, but I think Franklin and Speed are pretty good. So I think they're fine. Tight end also will be interesting to watch, but weapons on offense would just be nice to give Richardson and Steichen. Just in general, weapons on offense, obviously not running back, but weapons. Okay, so the Colts, pretty quick one. Not a lot to say there. Next up, the Jacksonville Jags. Jacksonville's also pretty obvious. I think helping Trevor Lawrence in terms of receiver and offensive line would be where I would go. I think center, the future of that position is up in the air after Mitch Morse leaves, probably after this year or retires. Brandon Scherf is getting a lot older, so interior offensive line, man. Guard, center, definitely going to be positions that they target. And then wide receiver. Gabe Davis is nothing special to me. I think he was brought in to help replace Calvin Ridley as an X-receiver. I don't think he's anything great, though. Zay Jones, they seem to like more than I do. Parker Washington kind of had some promise last year. Christian Kirk's obviously a really, really good player. But Devin Duvernay, I mean, he's a returner. So I think they could use another receiver if they can find one. Take a swing on one. Interior offensive line. Those are the two needs that I think they'll address. Otherwise, offensively, they're good at running back. They even have a backup quarterback in Mack now. Tight end is good in Evan Ingram. Tackles are in a good position. They've got 3 guys that were picked in the first 2 rounds, so they're fine. Defensively, I think cornerback 2 is a big spot that they need to address, and then edge depth. Other than that, I think they're fine. I like their safeties with Savage and Cisco now, and Wingard as well. So I think their safety position is improved, and linebackers, I think they're fine. So honestly, the Jags roster is looking pretty good. I think that CB2 and I think offensive line and wide receiver are the clear and obvious needs for Jacksonville. Next up, Kansas City. Kansas City, obviously, we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice, but wide receiver would probably be my first pick if I was the Chiefs. Wide receiver or tackle? I guess it depends who's on the board and how you value those guys and which one you think's better. But there's so many good receivers in this draft. So I would maybe look at tackle in the first, receiver in the second, depending on how it goes and how the board swings. You never know a tight end of the future. That's a position to think about at some point in this draft. I don't know if they're necessarily going to get one in this draft, though. I would also say that defensively, they could always use defensive line. I think somebody beside Chris Jones would be nice. I don't think they really have one. They continuously count on Mike Pennell, and he just keeps getting older. Derek Nandi has never really been the answer. I think defensive line on the edge, they're fine with Mike Dana coming back, George Karlaftis, and Charles Omenihu. I think that's a good 3 guys. Nothing special, but nothing, that they really need to address. Linebackers are good. Corners, I think, are still fine. I don't think that's a day one need. That's maybe take a swing in the 4th round type of thing. But they're good at finding corners. So don't count out corner. I think safety is low-key a need, but I think they like Connor, and Deion Bush is also a solid depth player. I would say receiver and tackle are clear and obvious needs. Outside of that, I think just defensive line, secondary depth, things like that. Maybe tight end, but those are areas that I would think about. Even running back, I'd think about, because after Pacheco, I don't think, they brought back Clyde, 3rd down running back, somebody with that skill set. Jerick McKinnon is ancient. I don't think he's on the roster right now. So next up, the Los Angeles Chargers. Wide receiver, offensive line, and then I put defensive line with a question mark because I think defensive line, I would say defensive line and remove the question mark. Looking at the roster, I think they spent on a tight end or the tight end position and the running back position. So they brought in Gus Edwards. I think they're fine with him being their lead tailback this year. They also have Isaiah Spiller, so we'll see how that works out. Tight end, Hayden Hurst and Will Disley, between the 2 of them, and Donald Parham, between the 3 of them, I think they have a tight end. Offensive line, they've got a first-round left tackle, first-round left guard. Corey Linsley, his future is kind of up in the air, but they did bring in Bradley Bozeman, who's been good in the system before, so I wouldn't be shocked if he started for them. Right side of the offensive line could use work. So that is where they maybe could go in the first round. And if they don't go in the first round at tackle, they could go receiver. So don't be shocked. Receiver or tackle in the first 2 rounds. That's, Joe Alt could be their pick. I think that they could go with Malik Neighbors. Oh my goodness, that would be good. So look out for that. Defensively, defensive line. Beef, good players. I think Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack are their edge rushers, so it's not an immediate need on the edge. They also spent a second-round pick on the edge position last year. So linebackers, I think they're okay. I like Henley. And then Denzel Perryman is a vet who can play a little bit. Nick Niemann. So they're not great at linebacker, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're in desperate need. Safety, they brought back Gilman, which was a big signing. Asante Samuel and Christian Fulton will be their outside corners. Maybe a nickel corner could be where they look. But I think defensive line, offensive line, wide receiver, I think those are going to be a majority of their picks, to be honest with you. Quentin Johnson was a first-round pick last year, but he kind of sucks. Josh Palmer, I like as a number 3, but I don't think he's a number 1 or a number 2. So they desperately need a receiver. I think they should pick receiver in the first round, and then I would spend on offensive line a little bit later because I don't think their offensive line needs are as desperate as a receiver. But that's just me. We'll see what Harbaugh ends up doing with this team. Next up, the Los Angeles Rams. Tackle, edge, and defensive line. Left tackle has been a need since pretty much your boy Whitworth has retired. But offensive line otherwise is really, really good. Receiver is obviously really, really good. I at least don't think they need another receiver until Cooper Kupp retires. Demarcus Robinson, they re-signed, and Puka Nacua is an absolute beast. Tight end, I think they could use one, but Kobe Parkinson, not Cody Parkinson, they signed him, so maybe they feel like he could be their tight end until Tyler Higbee is healthy. I think they signed Tyler Higbee, so I don't necessarily see that as a long-term type of need. Then defensive line, Aaron Donald's gone, so obviously they could use another defensive lineman. Kobe Turner is a good player. Edge rush. I think front seven. I love Ernest Jones. I think Ernest Jones is one of the most underrated linebackers in football. Secondary, they already did a lot in free agency, like Darius Williams, Tre'Davious White, Cameron Curl. They signed all those guys. And then they have Kobe Durant, the basketball player, also there. Darian Kendrick, who played quite a few snaps for them last year. So I don't think corner is going to be a big need. I kind of view it as edge rush, defensive line, tackle, just a lot of fundamental positions for them up front to try to strengthen this football team for the future. Next up, the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders are up next. Quarterback. Could they take a big swing on a quarterback? Gardner Minshew could be their starter this year, but I wouldn't be shocked if they went after a quarterback in this draft. So quarterback comes to mind first. Corner comes to mind second. I don't know if I love Bennett. I think he's okay. I think he showed flashes. Jack Jones also is extremely unreliable. Extremely talented, but extremely unreliable. Nate Hobbs is a good player. But corner for that alone, like with Jack Jones between his mind and Bennett just being maybe not a home run, but maybe something, but maybe not a home run. Corner could definitely be a pick. I don't think that defensive line will be a huge need early because Tyree Wilson was a first-round pick. Christian Wilkins, they just spent a huge amount of money on. And linebacker, I think they were actually really underrated at that position last year between Robert Spillane and Diablo. I think they're pretty good. And Luke Masterson is also okay. So I don't think they're bad at linebacker. Offensive line, they brought in Cody Whitehair to maybe start, but he's a high-end backup. Colton Miller's really good. Dylan Parham, I like. Andre James, I like. Right tackle could maybe be a need, but Munford played well last year, I thought. Michael Mayer is their tight end. Harrison Bryant is also kind of interesting as a backup tight end. So I kind of view it as maybe guard, corner, quarterback. You never know about running back here, but I think they like Zamir White. Safety? Maybe safety? I don't know, but that's kind of where I would think for the Raiders. The Raiders actually have a better roster than I thought, looking at their team right now. Wide receiver, it's really a third receiver, which I don't think is ever a huge need. Like, I think Trey Tucker could maybe be that guy. And they should be using Michael Marimore. So, yeah, we'll see. Next up, Miami Dolphins. Miami is really easy. Offensive line, defensive line, man. Pretty easy. Center, guard, tackle. It doesn't really matter. Take offensive line. Make sure that you can beef up in front of Tua, especially if you're going to make him your long-term solution at quarterback. So, tight end, I think they upgraded with Jonnu Smith. Receiver, they're obviously awesome. Don't need to really worry about the future either. Running back, they're really good. Raheem Mostert is a little bit older, but they've got Devin Achane, and then Jeff Wilson is still there, so they're fine. Defensively, I think defensive line could definitely use like a young stud. Christian Wilkins left. Raekwon Davis left. So, yeah, they did sign a bunch of guys, like a bunch. Benito Jones, Jonathan Harris, Tart, who I like, Neville Gallimore, Isaiah Mack. All these guys they signed this year. But those are not, Christian Wilkins. Those are not even, in my opinion, Davis. So, yeah, Zach Sealer's still there. Deshaun Hand is kind of interesting. But if they could get a young stud to help replace Wilkins, that would be a big asset. I think corner, they're good after signing Kendall Fuller. Safety, they're fine in the short term with Jordan Poyer. Linebacker, they're fine in the short term with Anthony Walker, Jordan Brooks, and David Long. So I think defensive line, offensive line are the obvious needs. Obvious. And I think that's really where all their picks should be spent. Center, guard, tackle, defensive line, interior. Next, the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, they obviously are going to look at quarterback. And if they can swing a trade for a quarterback, I think that's where they're going to go. And that's probably where a lot of their assets will have to be spent, is if they're going to trade up for Drake May or Jaden Daniels or J.J. McCarthy. Hopefully, they're just able to land J.J. McCarthy at number 11, but that's kind of seeming unlikely. So I think they're going to have to give up some assets to get a quarterback. But if they do get the quarterback, I think some of the areas that they could address later in the draft would be guard, because I don't think Blake Brendel is necessarily a starter. So left guard and defensive line, I think that Harrison Phillips is obvious as a starter, but who is the other guy? Like Jonathan Bullard, Jonah Williams, Jerry Tillery. Those are guys kind of like rotation players. I don't love them in a starting role. So defensive line, I think they're good at edge. I think they're good at linebacker. Corner, I think they could definitely use another perimeter corner, especially in Brian Flores' defense. The more corners, the better. But yeah, I would say guard, corner, outside of quarterback would be the primary needs for this team. And then just adding depth to the defense and trying to get some high upside kind of toolsy players to bring in. Next up, the New England Patriots. Patriots have three obvious needs, and it's killing me to see on every single draft show imaginable that the Patriots roster sucks. I made a rant about it already, but I just have to say it again. The Patriots roster is better than everybody thinks. When you go into a draft and you know that you need three positions and you really don't need anything else, to me, that's not a bad roster at all. And even if you ask me right now, could they start their offensive line the way it is right now? I honestly think you could start this offensive line. You've got Mike Onwenu at right tackle, and obviously you'd have to figure out who your left tackle is. But one of the guys you picked up just started a bunch of games for the Steelers. Another guy you've had in Connor McDermott has played a ton of football, right? Like Nick Leverett is there in case Cole Strange is hurt. Like your offensive line, in my opinion, is already in better shape than last year. Kelvin Anderson, to me, still has some upside. He's still on the roster. So, like, offensive line is the third to me. Like, just looking at the team, I think offensive line would be my third pick out of quarterback and wide receiver and offensive line. Because I think they need a number one receiver desperately. They have number threes and number twos maybe, right? I think Demario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, one of those guys could be a number two. I think KJ is a good number three. And I don't know what Juju is. I'm not even really counting him into this situation right now. Tight end, they've got tight ends. Like, sure. Could they maybe use a roaming free safety? Sure. Other than that, they don't need defense. So people talking about this team, like, get your quarterback at number 3. Hopefully it's Drake May. Get a receiver as high as you can. Honestly, I'd maybe look to trade up, but second round, you can get a really good one right there. Tackle can come on, sure, go tackle third and fourth round in a row. Why not? Like, seriously. So, I think the Patriots could find a really good receiver and a quarterback of the future and be set. The rest of the draft can be spent on the best player available. Edge rusher. Best edge rusher. Best defensive lineman. Best corner. Best linebacker. Best whatever. Guard. Like, people talking about the Patriots are just losing their mind. I don't understand what they're looking at. I don't understand if they watch them play. I don't understand if they look at grades. Like, how could you look at the grades of the defense and be like, oh, this defense sucks? How could you look at even the offense, some of the offensive linemen? Mike Onwenu's a really good player. Dave Andrews a little bit older, sure, but he's a good player. Like, compare the offensive line to other offensive lines. Like, Cole Strange is a first-round pick. And at times he's shown it, at times he hasn't. City Sal's kind of promising to me. Antonio Mafi actually is kind of promising to me with some upside. Like, I don't know, man. I just feel like I'm out on a limb. Hunter Henry is a top 15 tight end. Ramondre Stevenson is a top 15 running back. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm drunk. Next, the New Orleans Saints are next. I actually look at the Saints and I think their roster is solid. I think my problem with the Saints is the coaching and the quarterback just don't give them a lot of upside. I actually look at the roster and I've spent some time looking at it because I was thinking about making a video about them. And honestly, I just think they need more out of Derek Carr. So how do you do that? Maybe you upgrade the offensive line. Can you upgrade guard? Can you upgrade tackle? That's a possibility for them. I think their receivers are really good. Like, I really like Chris Olave. I really like Rashid Shaheed. Maybe they could use like a big body go up and get it receiver, but they did bring in Cedric Wilson. I like their tight ends. They still got the greatest football player on earth, Taysom Hill, so they're fine there. Alvin Kamara, he's kind of regressing, but they spent a pick last year on Miller. They've got Jamal Williams. It's not like you're really going to go out on a limb and get a running back. Defensive line, they've gotten better. Chase Young's going to help them. Cameron Jordan's still there. Carl Granderson is still there. So Isaiah Foskey was a second-round pick. Brian Brzee looked promising as a rookie. Kalen Saunders, Nathan Shepard, fine interior players. I think they could use another one there. Linebacker, I think they're really good. Demario Davis is older, but Willie Gay is there. And then you've got Pete Werner, who's fine. Corners, I think they're underrated. Debo, I like. Lattimore, I love. And Taylor's a good player. And then Matthew is old as dirt. So, like, safety, maybe. Definitely safety, I would say. Because I don't really think they have another starter. And then Matthew's also old. So I think safety is definitely a spot they're going to have to address. Offensive line is a spot they're going to have to address. And defensive tackle. I think those are kind of the areas that I thought about that stick out to me. And then they just need to get more out of Derek Carr. Like, really, it's that simple. And it comes down to coaching, and I just don't know if the coaching is there. Next up, the New York Giants. The New York Giants, I don't think offensive line is as big of a need as people think anymore because of what they've done in the offseason. Jermaine Illuminor is going to give them so much versatility. because it will allow them to rather start Evan Neal and bail from Evan Neal and sit him on the bench, or it's going to allow them to have versatility with Neal or Illuminor playing potentially guard. John Runyon can also play guard. Aaron Stinney is also a fine guard. Andrew Thomas is really good. John Schmitz Jr. is promising. Michael John Schmitz Jr., the center they drafted last year. Darius Slayton can fulfill one of the receiver positions. Jalen Hyatt is a burner. Wan'Dale Robinson is their quick, shifty slot guy, and they need a number one receiver. So I think in the first round, Malik Neighbors should be the pick, unless Marvin Harrison somehow gets there. But I think Malik Neighbors should be the pick. I don't think they should go quarterback this year. I think they should wait till next year. Give Daniel Jones one more year, just like whatever. Drew, if he sucks, just put in Drew Lock. It is what it is. You're not going to be a Super Bowl team this year anyways. You could even get Tommy DeVito in there. Running back could definitely use an upgrade. Devin Singletary is a fine running back. I don't think he's a great running back, so maybe take a swing on a running back, but this isn't the class really to do that, so maybe they run with Devin Singletary as their starter for this year. Front seven definitely got an upgrade with Brian Burns, and so I think that their front seven is really solid because they've got two elite players potentially, and Burns on the edge and Dexter Lawrence on the inside. Thibodeau, I think, is a little overrated, but he's good. Azeez Ojulari's shown upside, but he's been hurt a lot. Jordan Phillips was a nice little pickup. Linebacker, they could maybe use another one, but I don't really see that as a huge need. I think safety, corner, and receiver are their biggest needs. And then I think, yeah, you could still look at like offensive line, maybe a project quarterback, but I don't know. I kind of feel like quarterback should come next year maybe for them. I think receiver, with this receiver class, just take the receiver. Don't try to take the fourth quarterback. Just take the second receiver. And then take secondary in the second, third round. That's kind of how I feel. Let me know what you Giants fans think. Next up, we got the New York Jets. The New York Jets. Obviously, they don't have a lot of needs because they've had a huge offseason. Wide receiver, I still think at wide receiver 3 is a bit of a need, but Alan Lazard could definitely be the receiver 3. Xavier Gibson is also a little promising. I like what I saw from him late in the year last year. Offensive line, I think they're good outside of depth tackle. I think future tackle is the way that I should claim it. So if they want to go tackle in the first round, I totally get it. Or maybe they'll go tackle in the second round. I also totally get that as well. Do they have a second round pick? I don't even know. Tight end, could they go with Brock Bowers? That would be amazing. I'd also love that because he could be like your third receiver / your starting tight end. And then you could kind of utilize Tyler Conklin or Alan Lazard kind of interchangeably, depending on the formation or the role. Maybe you could draft a counselor for Aaron Rodgers. That could also be something that you could do. The defensive line is really, really strong. The linebacker position could use a hint of depth, but I don't think that's desperate. Safety definitely needs somebody. So I think safety, I think future tackle, receiver, or tight end. Those are the positions that stand out to me. So if I went, I could definitely buy into Brock Bowers with that first pick. Next, Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles are weird because I feel like their roster on the surface is pretty darn good and doesn't have a lot of needs. But at the same time, like they just have players that are underachieving. Like James Bradbury is still on this team. He is a piece of doggy doo-doo, okay? Reed Blankenship on the surface should be a starting safety, but he sucks. Darius Slay on the surface is a really good player, but like he's ancient. Like Devin White, they signed at linebacker, but like, what are we getting from Devin White? Nakobe Dean is a big name. What are we getting from Nakobe Dean? So this team might be the hardest team to talk about draft needs because they've made so many moves that would make you say, they've actually gotten better there, or they've actually, Devontae Parker is the number 3 receiver, or Paris Campbell is the number 3 receiver. Yeah, that sounds good to me. But are they really? I don't know. Like, I saw Devontae Parker couldn't separate for 4 years consecutively. Paris Campbell can't stay on the field. and can't really seem to do anything other than run drag routes. Matt Hennessy was a nice pickup for depth on the offensive line. I think that future tackle could be in the question here. Tight end, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, they're good. Running back, obviously, they got Saquon. Backup quarterback, they got Kenny Pickett. Defensive line, interior, I think they're good. Like, I don't think it's really a big need. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, all good players. Bryce Huff, they spent on Brandon Graham. They love to spend on depth on the defensive end position, but they've got Huff and they've got Sweat and they've got Smith, so they don't really need it. Linebacker, maybe they could take another swing there. Oren Burks is kind of interesting. Zach Bond, they also picked up, and Devin White. But linebacker, they don't have a certainty at that position. Safety, Sidney Brown was a pick last year. I think he's better than Blankenship, and I like the pickup of C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Corner is definitely a need because Darius Slay and James Bradbury, they're rather too old or they're just not good anymore. So I need corners. So corners, future offensive line with Lane Johnson, and then like linebacker, I would say. Yeah. All right, next. Steelers are up next. The Pittsburgh Steelers. They need wide receiver. They need left tackle. I don't really even need to like expand upon that. Dan Moore is their starting left tackle right now, and Van Jefferson is their number 2 receiver. I think that speaks for itself. Okay, so wide receiver and left tackle. After that, they need secondary. I would say safety, corner, both could be needs. Interior defensive line is a sneaky need, although Dean Lowry was added, and they're good for now. Like, they've got Cameron Hayward. Benton was pretty good as a rookie. Larry Ogunjobi's still there. Like, they don't need it right now, but when Cameron Hayward leaves, that's going to be a need, right? So, future of the defensive tackle position or defensive line. Linebacker, they upgraded, and they still got a Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, and they've got Patrick Queen, so they're good at linebacker. I would say CB2 or CB3, nickel corner, either way, because Dante Jackson, maybe he's your CB2, but he's unreliable. He's pretty inconsistent. And then nickel corner, and then safety. Deshaun Elliott, I would say, is better than what they have at CB2 or CB3 in terms of safety to corner. So I'd say wide receiver, tackle, cornerback / nickelback are their 3 biggest needs. And just pray that the quarterback works out. Next up, Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks are interesting because they got a new coach. So how's that going to work? I think offensive line is a huge need. They need guards. They need centers. So just offensive line. That's going to spend that should be half their picks. Then after the offensive line, quarterback, I don't think they're going to be looking at. A wide receiver, they should not be looking at. Running back, they should not be looking at. Tight end, I think they're fine there. I like the Pharaoh Brown pickup. Defensive line, I actually think they're underrated on the defensive line with Leonard Williams, Jerron Reed, Draymond Jones, and Jonathan Hankins. I think they'll be plenty good for Mike McDonald. I think they could maybe use another like big-time edge rusher. But they do have Derek Hall, Uchenna Nwosu, who is really good, Boye Mafe, and Darrell Taylor. So I don't necessarily think it's a huge need. Like, all these guys were drafted in the 2nd round. So, and then with McDonald, like, that's not a premier position for him. Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson are underrated linebackers. I like those pickups as well. Honestly, cornerback, like another corner on the perimeter or another safety could definitely be something they look at because they have Rayshawn Jenkins, who I kind of think is more of a number 3. Julian Love is there, but so safety / corner, so secondary and offensive line, center, guard, and maybe Ed. I don't know. It's tough. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what they value here. But yeah, just like anywhere that Mike McDonald wants to upgrade his defense, whether that's safety, corner, whether that's defensive line, whether that's edge, I don't know. Like, I think they have enough base talent. It's a weird team They have enough base talent to make it work, but they don't really have a lot of alpha studs. So it's kind of interesting. Seahawks are interesting. Next up, San Francisco 49ers. 49ers are super obvious for me. Maybe this is because, kind of my number 2 team. But right tackle, right guard, center, I think are all needs. So they've got a lot of picks too, so they can make this happen. But center, I think, is probably better off than what they have at right tackle and right guard right now. But I would say offensive line, wherever they can improve the most. I would also say that corner 2 is a need, CB2, safety is a need, because you're thinking about the 49ers as a Super Bowl team. So where can they instantly get an impactful player? And to me, I would say that safety could definitely use one, corner could definitely use one, and offensive line. And those would be the biggest needs. After that, they're good at running back, they're stacked. Tight end, maybe a backup. Purdy, you've got... I'd definitely say tackle is huge because also Trent Williams is older. Wide receiver, they're stacked. Defensively, they've got a stacked defensive line. Enough depth at linebacker with Devondre Campbell coming in, as well as Ezekiel Turner. They did add Isaac Yiadom and Rock Ya-Sin. I forgot about that at corner. So maybe they prioritize safety over corner and offensive line, obviously. But I think they're going to spend big on the offensive line. Brandon Parker was also brought in, who's kind of interesting on the offensive line. But yeah, they've made some nice, savvy little pickups here, the 49ers. Next up, the Tampa Bay Bucks. The Bucks actually don't have as many needs as I would have thought. I think many of them come on the offensive line. I think they need a guard and maybe a center. They did pick up Ben Bredeson, who started for the Giants before at center. But I think they need center/guard, and I think they need just an explosive edge rusher or a corner. Or a linebacker. They need another explosive, game-changing front seven player. On the edge specifically, that'd be a big need for them. I like their safeties, although they could use maybe a third safety. I love the pickup of Thomas at the nickel position. I think that's a great pickup for them. Zion McCollum is kind of up and down. I don't mind him. I don't know if he's necessarily a starting corner, though. Jamel Dean is still there. The linebacker is definitely a need. So linebacker, edge player, corner, offensive line. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Obviously, Baker's there long term. Tight end, I think Cade Otton is good enough. So, Tampa, Tennessee. The Tennessee Titans. Tennessee's good at receiver now that they signed Calvin Ridley. I think that tackle is going to be where they go early in the draft. I could also see them going, Brock Bowers is a possibility. I personally like a Conquo. He's maybe a little raw and not a great route runner and a well-defined tight end, but he's super athletic, and I don't know. I just like him as a player. I feel like tackle is definitely where they should go, though, early. They need offensive line. Tony Pollard, the running back, and they've got Spears at running back. Will Levis, I don't think they're going to go quarterback at all. I think defensive line and the inside to help out Jeff Simmons is a big need because I don't think Sebastian Joseph Day is a starter. I also think they need linebackers desperately. I don't think that Kenneth Murray is a starter. Edge, I think, is another big need for them. Arden Key is, to me, more of a number 3 than a number 2. And then they're good in the secondary. But D-line, edge, linebacker, tackle. Those are the areas that I view as biggest needs, and then maybe tight end. But that's how I view the Tennessee Titans. Then the last team is the Washington Commanders. Commanders, I think all their fans kind of know. Receiver, they're not going to spend on. They're good there. Quarterback is obviously going to be the number 2 pick. So I didn't even put it on the list, I don't think. Offensive line is still a need. I especially think tackle could definitely be a need for them. Tight end is a need for the future. It's kind of a sneaky need. I think they're good at running back for now. I think defensive line, like a big-time edge rusher. Like, Dorrance Armstrong's not a number one edge rusher. I like him. He's not that good. Dante Fowler is not that good. Like, rotation players, Farrell is a rotation player. Linebackers, they're good. Don't need them for now. Corner, they could definitely utilize. Michael Davis was a decent pickup. But I feel like their safeties are actually really underrated. I like Forrest. I like Chin a lot. And I like Reeves. So I don't think they need safeties. I think they need corner. I think they need edge. I think they need tackle. Maybe tight end. And obviously quarterback. But those are the areas that they should spend all their picks on. Premier players as much as possible. And premier positions for the Commanders as a rebuilding team. Those are the needs, and those are the areas that your team must fix entering 2024. Thank you guys for listening. If you've made it all this way, let me know in the comments. Just comment TB12 in the comment section if you made it all the way to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. It's Mitch. Love you. Subscribe. Gronk spike the like button. Peace.